This is Sky News with Jeremy Thompson.
Very good evening. The Deputy Prime Minister has visited the scene of the riots in Tottenham, promising that the government would work to repair the scars left within the community. Nick Clegg met police councillors and local business owners after earlier condemning the violence in the capital as completely unacceptable. Home Secretary has now come back to London after ending her holiday early in response to the unrest, and we're expecting a statement from her in the next few minutes. First, though, our main report from Sky's Ian Woods in Tottenham.
Nick Clegg came to see the destruction and get a taste of the anger which preceded the riot and the frustrations which continue to simmer. Those who caused the damage may be the main culprits, but the police and politicians are those fielding awkward questions.
It should have been contained. It should have been sorted out.
We've just been talking about it. I mean, the police will do their review of what actually happened, literally just right here on the high street.
This building contained 24 privately owned apartments. Naturally, the people who lost their homes and all their possessions are furious at those who started the fire, but they're also angry at the police for failing to protect them.
Our flats are it's just a shell now.
What have you lost, Pat?
Everything. In the clothes. The clothes, I mean, that's all I've got. And that's all that we all have got. Just the clothes that we've got nothing. We've got absolutely nothing. And we were left to die, basically. We were left to die. It's like we were under siege. We didn't have anybody helping us, nobody at all. There were no police there. When we went outside, there were no police there. There was no ambulance. There was absolutely nothing.
If all this was apparently triggered by the shooting of Mark Duggan on Thursday evening, it's perhaps surprising that only 3 people have left flowers at the place where he died. IPCC investigators arrived on the scene at 9 p.m, almost 3 hours after the shooting. But 5 days into their inquiry, the information vacuum means that conspiracy theories are growing about how Mark Duggan died. The IPCC are appealing for witnesses, but suggestions that a bullet which was lodged in a police radio was one of their own and had not been fired from another weapon has raised more awkward questions. But people who live nearby told me that a police surveillance vehicle had been filming the road for several days before the shooting. They claim to have seen armed plainclothes police hiding in bushes nearby, and say the taxi in which Mark Duggan was a passenger was taken away from the scene before being brought back later for more tests. And while the rumour mill continues to churn out theories, the local MP wants the facts.
Clearly, when a man dies in that manner on a London street, there are big questions, and we see speculation in the media today. I know no more, but there are some serious answers about what the nature of the operation was in Tottenham, because it was not an operation led by Tottenham police, it was led by Operation Trident, centrally.
It may be the middle of the week before the centre of Tottenham is reopened to the public. Community leaders here think it's important that the Metropolitan Police, or the IPCC, open up by then too.
As you can see from the pictures on the Sky Copter right now, we are live over the heart of Hackney. This is around Mayor Street, very much the focal point of Hackney, that North London borough, not far from the town hall here in the Hackney Empire, and there have been quite a number of people on the streets there. Their objectives uncertain at the moment, but certainly there have been a few scuffles with police. Police are now there in reasonably sizable numbers, and we've heard that 1 or 2 things. We saw a police car being attacked a bit earlier. They smashed up a police car. There are reports that bins at the side of the road have been set alight. At the moment, it's relatively low-key, but there is clearly tension in the air there in another North London suburb. Let's bring in our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who's in Scotland Yard. Martin, it certainly seems that the problems around some London boroughs, inner-city boroughs and mid-city boroughs are spreading like some sort of curious contagion at the moment.
Yes, I suppose it's very difficult to put your finger on exactly why it's happening, unless it is purely a copycat reaction. It appears, I think, at the moment, Jeremy, that whatever was going on in Hackney has certainly died down. Whether it's about to flare up again, it's very difficult to tell. I mean, witnesses talked about lots of chairs being thrown, but certainly some direct clashes with the police officers who went into that area. I suppose what's unusual, and it's quite early in the day for such a thing to begin. I mean, the last 2 nights we've seen those kind of activities being carried out largely under cover of darkness. You know, if we're going to see outbreaks of such violence in broad daylight, then I think senior officers here who've been meeting this afternoon planning for the possibility of such activity tonight will be rather alarmed. And as we've seen again, this is a borough that has been unvisited by this. I mean, quite close to the Tottenham area. But last night, you know, the disturbances were a long way, or some of them were a long way from Tottenham. I know the neighbouring borough, Enfield, had problems of its own, similar scenes to activity elsewhere. But, you know, Hackney for the first time perhaps, and in broad daylight, I think that is of some concern. And one other thing I picked up this afternoon, Jeremy, and this is going to be a continuing issue, I think, the suspension of riot cop training, public order training for some officers has had to be suspended. This is one of the consequences of the Met's force being stretched so much over the past 48 hours and the anticipation that they will have to cope with more of this. There are 2 levels of public order cops. There's the full-time squad, the riot squad if you like, the TSG, which is trained, fully trained, but you have a second level, Jeremy, of almost part-time riot cops. They do other duties. They're full-time officers. They do other duties. They drive patrol cars and so forth. But every year they undergo a 2-day retraining course. People will see the pictures where they're put in a riot scenario, bottles are thrown at them, bricks, Molotov cocktails, that kind of thing. And of course they're brought up to date with current thinking, new thinking, perhaps in tactics and training and techniques. All of that has had to be suspended, and the implication is, Jeremy, that there will be some officers going out tonight expected to take part in policing those events who will not have had that refresher course for the past year or so, and I think that is causing some concern.
Just looking at these pictures, there's a bit of a rush of people on the streets of central Hackney. Not sure whether the police have pushed in there, but certainly 2 sets of people on the streets heading off down C streets, off side streets, just off Mayor Street in the heart of town. See a lot of wood on the road there. It's noticeable whilst Martin was talking that a white articulated lorry turned up and was just waiting at the junction there when looters quite literally broke into the back and pulled out metal planks and things that were being carried in the lorry and just strewed them over the road. Some people made off with some of the bits of wood there. And it appears, Martin Brunt, as we watch these scenes with our viewers, that it is quite simply criminality, just overt criminality at the moment, opportunism, looting and criminality. There doesn't appear to be any greater or higher objective in mind for these younger people who are out on the streets at the moment.
Yes, we spoke to the Acting Commissioner Tim Godwin a couple of hours ago, and he said that people really do need to distinguish between genuine grievance over the shooting of Mark Duggan by police and criminality, and it's the phrase sheer criminality that police chiefs today have been using for many hours, and they were using that phrase on Saturday night to describe a lot of what was going on in Tottenham, saying that people had really just used the excuse and the anger and resentment within the Tottenham community over Mark Duggan's shooting to go on that trail of violence and damage. And I think they were saying that on Saturday night. I think that their words have been borne out and supported really by the events of last night, where it spread outside of Tottenham and in some cases as far south as Brixton. And again, as you say, perhaps this is another example of it happening today in Hackney, again in broad daylight, which is a new departure, but something that will cause great concern here.
Martin, for the moment, thanks. We'll keep watching these pictures from our Sky Copter and take you verbally at least 5 miles north to Tottenham, further north on an outer North London borough where the troubles first emerged earlier in the weekend. Ian Woods, whose report you heard earlier, is there for us live as we watch these disturbing scenes in Hackney in broad daylight today. Tell us a bit more about the feel of what the last 48 hours have brought to Tottenham, Ian, and what the reaction has been.
Not a terribly well-off area.
Well, I think, Jeremy, there's a great deal of frustration here that several issues are all coming to the fore now. For example, thousands of people are angry and irritated that the centre of Tottenham is still sort of sealed off 2 days after the riot because it creates a lot of inconvenience. But other people have got really serious concerns because they've lost their homes. We heard from one resident a short time ago who's lost everything she owns because she had an apartment in the building behind me. And there's great anger directed at the people who started that fire, of course. But there's also a great deal of anger at what they see as the lack of protection from the authorities on the night. They said that they could see police vehicles going up and down the road, but when it came to the point where the fire was being started, the police were nowhere in sight. So they've got real concerns about that. Lastly, I think there's a lot of concern from people that what they feel are justifiable questions which they are asking and wanting answers to as regarding the shooting of Mark Duggan are rather being overwhelmed by the rioting and the fact that people are taking to the streets in a criminal form, as we're seeing now in Hackney and as was seen in other London boroughs overnight, that somehow that is taking away from the original concern of theirs, which was the killing of Mark Duggan. And when I went back to the scene of the shooting on Thursday night, when I back there earlier today, there was almost a welcoming from a lot of people who, even though they didn't want to go on camera and talk about it, they were welcoming the fact that we were getting back to what they saw as the main issue, which was the shooting in this incident of Mark Duggan and how that happened. There is, of course, a lot of talk about whether or not he may have been armed, but also concern that shots may have been fired just from the police and not from any other weapon. And until the ballistics results, which are being looked at by the Forensic Science Service at the moment, are released, and we're hoping that's going to happen according to the IPCC within the next 24 hours, it does allow conspiracy theories to build. And even though I've talked to people who are very dismissive of execution-style tactics, they are still concerned until they find out exactly what happened and whether or not there was an attempt by Mark Duggan, if he did have a weapon, to fire it, or whether it was simply the police firing. That's the sort of information that they want to try to get to the bottom of.
Thanks very much, Ian, for the moment. So a very febrile, feverish atmosphere across parts of London at the moment over the weekend and continuing this Monday evening. Those pictures from Hackney, more evidence that the start of this unrest in Tottenham seems to have turned into some sort of contagion, some sort of copycat criminality in several areas of the capital. Sky's senior correspondent David Bowden has been to Brixton in South London to talk to those affected by last night's looting. And this is his report.
While the rioting and vandalism grabbed the headlines and the attention of the police, there was criminality taking place in London's hotspots that seems to have gone unchallenged thus far. Apparently without fear of being disturbed, let alone caught, looters helped themselves to everything from high-end electrical appliances to cigarettes, alcohol and cash. Azza Khan was one of many victims when both of his off-licences were hit by a gang of knife-wielding masked youths. This is the CCTV of the robbery taking place, and this is what else was happening.
Just got raided, 12 o'clock at night, good 30 of them. Just walked straight in, shutters were down, they just walked straight in.
And did what?
They had big knives in their hand, so couldn't really do nothing.
Were you here?
No, I had a couple of mates here. One of the staff, two of my mates. They had big knives, told them to go lock themselves in the bathroom before they get stabbed.
Other pictures from outside Mr. Khan's shop show the thieves carrying off their haul before moving on to their next target. Azza Khan doesn't believe the criminals were motivated by anything other than greed.
I think it's just an excuse for them to get things out, people's shops or whatever. Just an excuse.
Police have been criticised for effectively turning a blind eye to the mass looting. But one former officer says there's little they can do in such circumstances.
Once you've got a number of youths that are intent on that, the police have got little they can do to actually resolve the situation there and then. They can move people away, they can disperse crowds, but if those crowds are then intent on going somewhere else and starting again or reforming somewhere else, then you get this situation where basically the police and they are sort of playing cat and mouse around different areas of London.
At Brixton's famous market, stallholders and shoppers alike were mulling over the night's events, but were split about what caused this area to erupt into lawlessness.
They've taken the opportunity to just kind of use it to their advantages, most of the criminals, so it's just bad, it's just really bad.
What happened on Friday with the shooting of the boy up in Norwood?
You think there's a link?
Yeah, without a doubt.
When the pressure comes down, the poor get into their mind and they get going with their ego or whatever. But there was really no need for it.
Pinning it all down to barefaced criminality, I think that's a bit sort of naive. There may be some other issues as well which we need to look at and assess thoroughly.
Police forensic teams have been busy for many hours trying to catch the culprits, but it's not easy. Some people clearly believe that there is a link between the shooting dead by police in Tottenham of Mark Duggan and the unrest in other areas of London over the past few days. But all the evidence, certainly here in Brixton, points to a far simpler reason for the lawlessness. Looting and theft, basic criminality, and little or nothing to do with social justice. CCTV images from Azhar Khan's shop and dozens more will be checked and double-checked for clues. But how many of the looters ever see the inside of a courtroom is open to question. David Bowden, Sky News in Brixton.
Let's just remind you of the latest pictures from the Skycopter hovering over.
Well, the partner of the man whose death triggered the weekend's riots has told Channel 4 News that the protests against his death have got out of control. In her first television interview, Simone Wilson denied that Mark Duggan was a gangster and criticised the police for their lack of communication with his family after he died. But she said the riots of the last 3 days have nothing to do with the initial protest march in Tottenham on Saturday. Our Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel reports.
Simone Wilson is still in shock, still struggling to pick up the pieces, still trying to get answers. Mark Duggan was her partner and was the man police shot dead in Tottenham last Thursday night. The demonstration that followed wanted answers. The riots that followed wanted something else.
There's a lot of angry people out there. People that don't even know Mark are angry at the way it was dealt with.
Who do you hold responsible?
The police. Definitely the police. My children don't know. Mark's children don't know that he's gone. We can't tell them yet because they're going to be asking questions. And we don't have the answers to it.
In Tottenham, the communities are awash with rumour. Thursday night's official version was Duggan opened fire, the police shot back, and these pictures show the aftermath. CPR couldn't change anything. Then there were reports of only 2 bullets being fired, and the one that lodged in a police radio may be police issue. More rumours.
If he had the gun in his hand, why didn't they shoot him in his hand to disarm him? Why did he get a shot to his chest? They're telling me they can't answer that question. They don't know. That's all I'm getting. They don't know.
The vacuum of uncertainty prompted the demonstration. They wanted answers. Tottenham police didn't have them. Worse still, they waited in hope. They were told the police commissioner was on his way, but he never arrived.
I know Mark. Mark is not going to do that. 100%. 100%. Mark is the kind of person, if he did have a gun, which I don't know, if he did, Mark would run. Mark is a runner. He would run rather than firing. And that's coming from the bottom of my heart. I know. I know.
Did you know he had a gun?
No. No.
So that was a surprise to you?
That was a surprise. Mark, they're portraying Mark to be a gangster. Mark is not a gangster. He's not known to any gangsters or any gangs. He's not like that.
Today, the Independent Police Complaints Commission promised that the results of ballistic tests will be known in the next 24 hours. But Channel 4 News has learned that the bullet that killed Mark Duggan and the bullet that lodged in an officer's radio were both fired by police. Some community leaders in Tottenham are adamant the riots were not the first police operation that went pear-shaped, and where the potential consequences were only barely thought through.
The expectation, I think, of the local community was that senior people would be on hand to provide comfort, policing, but also answers to families like the Duggan family.
And they weren't. They were either at the yard or they were on holiday.
That's what I'm told. And that is unacceptable, given that obviously the public expectation is that people recognise the importance of this situation once it had happened on Thursday.
It's got out of hand, but it's gone way past. It's not connected to this anymore. I don't think it's got nothing to do with the march. This is out of control. It's out of control. Innocent people are getting hurt. Children have got no homes. It's just not needed at all.
And now it's even further out of hand, with another night ahead of disturbances verging on riots. But what's emerging about what triggered all of this last week offers little comfort if it turns out there was no gunfight, in direct contradiction of the official version.
It's 6 years after the death of Mark Duggan, who was shot by an armed police officer, and a vigil is being held in his honour. Gathering in Tottenham, where the 29-year-old was shot, family, friends and members of the public say they demand justice for his death. The event has taken place every year since Duggan died. In March, his family's attempt to overturn the inquest's ruling of lawful killing was rejected by the Court of Appeal. His death in 2011 sparked 5 days of riots in London and across England. This year, his family are also demanding justice following the deaths of other young black men after contact with police, the most recent being Rashan Charles last month. And I spoke to Marcus Knox-Hook, who was a close friend of Mark Duggan, and he told me that police have not learned from mistakes that have been made in the past.
6 years on from Mark's death, nothing hasn't changed regarding the police. They're still applying an unreasonable amount of pressure to people, you get me, when it comes to stop and search. Just the other day in Hackney, a kid was killed, he was restrained, strangled. So it's just to show you that, look, 6 years ago, you understand the situation happened, 6 years on from that, we're still in the same situation.
You talk about justice, and of course the law decreed that Mark Duggan's killing was lawful. That was back in 2014. So why did that not actually bring about closure for all concerned? Why was that not seen as a legal, justifiable way of ending this case?
Because the verdict was a perverse verdict as far as I'm concerned. The jury said that he never had a gun in his hand, but yet he was shot, and the verdict was lawful killing. So to us, you get me, like, we can't accept that. So obviously we're coming out, you understand, to show the world, you get me, that we're still striving for justice, hoping that some sort of change would happen.
We're seeing a lot of anger, we're seeing protests in the light of the recent incident. In what way is the black community trying to improve relations with the police? Often people are saying it's the police should be doing it, but what sort of actions and efforts are you making, for example, to try and make things better with community relations?
Well, I mean, I made a film. I was involved in a film called The Heart Stop. Obviously, you can see that on Netflix. And since that, we've been in contact. Well, the police have tried to get in contact with my director and producer, saying that they want to speak to me on setting up a sort of program that would involve in the police training. So I don't know, they will sit down and talk with me and ask me, get me, like, what do I feel the police need to change, and what do I think their approach should be, and so on and so forth. And then they would use that material in police training, like when new recruits are coming to the force and they're being trained, you get me? So that's one step, like building a barrage, building the bridge between two worlds. So it's a step, you get me? And I think the more boroughs that do that with their communities, I think probably we'll get somewhere.
The following report contains flash photography.
August 2011. Under the red blanket, a man lies dead, shot by police minutes earlier. This was filmed by a member of the public. The dead man was Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old father of 6 from Tottenham. Today his family heard an inquest jury conclude that his killing by police was lawful, a finding that had been greeted with cries of fury inside the court.
We came for justice today. We don't feel that we're leaving with justice. We feel we're leaving with a great injustice.
And we're going to fight until we have no breath in our body for justice, for Mark, for his children, and for all of those of the deaths in custody that have had nothing. We are not giving up. No justice, no peace.
The killing of Mark Duggan prompted a protest at the time, which sparked a riot, and the unrest spread across England. The subsequent destruction and looting was the worst in a generation. Police had identified Mark Duggan as a senior member of a violent gang, Tottenham Mandem. A police briefing said he'd been arrested but never charged for possession of guns and attempted murder. Tonight, a senior officer said that police tactics had reduced gun crime in the capital. But outside the court, as he defended the police marksman known as V53, his voice was all but drowned out by protesters.
But that Mark Duggan had a gun and that V53 had an honest and reasonable belief that Mark Duggan still had the gun when he shot him.
On the day Mark Duggan was shot, police had intelligence he was going to pick up a gun. They followed a minicab as he collected a shoebox containing the weapon. As Mark Duggan later headed for Tottenham, armed police in unmarked cars forced the minicab to stop.
The inquest had to consider what happened here. When Mark Duggan got out of the minicab, did he pose an imminent threat to the police? Were the officers right when they said that he was holding a gun? And if so, how did the gun end up some 20 feet away on the other side of the fence?
A majority of the jury concluded that Mark Duggan threw the gun to this spot, marked in white, before he was shot dead by police. But they were told by the coroner that if they believed the police officer who fired honestly thought he was holding a gun, then they could find the killing was lawful. A firearms officer who arrived minutes after the shooting and seen in this footage says she shares the belief of her colleagues that Mark Duggan was holding a gun. She's now retired from the force and wishes to remain anonymous.
I 100% believe that Mark Duggan was a threat either to the police officers or somebody else at the scene, and that is why he was shot, and I believe that shooting to be justified. I also believed that if he had come out of the minicab under instruction by police and left the firearm in the cab, he would be alive today.
But in an exclusive interview with the BBC, a civilian witness who gave evidence to the inquest said Mark Duggan clearly wasn't holding a gun, and he appeared to be surrendering when he was killed.
To be honest, it could have been handled a lot better, where they could have restrained him, they could have arrested him, but no, they just shot him, whereas I just think it was an execution, really. They just wanted him dead.
Tonight, Mark Duggan's aunt Carol, flanked by some of his children, agreed to meet police in the wake of the inquest conclusion.
We will talk to the police. We have got Mark's children here. They want to ask questions.
The Met admits it will take time to rebuild relationships with people in the borough. Matt Prodger, BBC News.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlie Veach and I have to do a video about Mark Duggan, the jury result that he was lawfully killed, the London riots in 2011, but above all, a major story here that I want to talk about alienation and a sectarianizing of society between law-abiding, or people who obey the law, citizens, and an underworld of people who cannot use the law to protect their interests. And I speak obviously of drug dealers, hard drug dealers, gun dealers, people who deal weapons, people smugglers, other nefarious activities that if you're ripped off, you can't phone the police. You can't say, hey, some guy stole £50,000 worth of ecstasy tablets from my garage. Come and arrest them. And people like Mark Duggan, because of this fact, because they live in an underworld where they cannot use the law to protect their interests, they arm themselves with pistols and machine guns, submachine guns, grenades, blades, machetes, knives. And we have a very sad situation. And for the international audience who don't know very much about this, I'll give you a very quick rundown, a very quick intro. Mark Duggan was a 26-year-old young man in London who was shot dead by an armed response police team in 2011 in Tottenham, which is in North London. And after the police shot this man dead, there were many days of the most vicious rioting in Britain for a generation since the Brixton riots in the early 80s. Birmingham was rioting, Manchester was rioting, there are several locations throughout London. The police totally lost control of key parts of the city. They had to pull back because they were scared of being shot by other armed gangsters, or just armed people. Whether they were gangsters or not, we can only assume. But London burned, Manchester burned where I live here. It was all burning, everyone looting and smashing up shops, people being beaten like dogs in the street to within an inch of their lives. Some Asian brothers got run over and killed in the madness, and hundreds of police got injured. It's an ugly story. People's businesses, lifelong businesses getting burnt down, and so many commentators arguing whether this was a political reaction or a criminal reaction, and that's a different story. Anyway, the story of Mark Duggan. A jury inquest, a jury trial found the police killing was lawful, as opposed to Princess Diana, which was an unlawful killing. The inquest found it was the paparazzi chasing her Mercedes that killed her. The jury of 10 average Joes and Janes, in the jury. This wasn't lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses. This was 10 ordinary people who found the evidence towards a lawful killing of Mark Duggan. And because of this, the entire family of the Duggans are very upset, and they're doing big vigils outside the police station. They interrupted the police statement at the High Court. They're quite rightly in the news a lot. I mean, I don't know what it's like to lose a close family member, much less lose a close family member to a bullet by a Metropolitan Police officer. But to separate all the hysteria, we need to, as I said, we need to contract this fractal down. We need to bring it down to basics. And let's look at a few basic facts here. Mark Duggan had 6 children. 6 little human beings, his children, that depended on him as a daddy, as a father, as a provider. Mark Duggan was in good health. He lived in London, one of the big global cities of the world, where the streets aren't literally paved with gold, but there's a lot of money, there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, there's a lot of people needing people to do things. I was unemployed in London for a few days, and an Irish friend of mine said, "Hey Charlie, do you want to earn £100 a day tax-free clearing out houses?" I said, well yeah. And we got to clear out houses in Kensington for £100 a day, and that was, there's always work. And I speak as a father. I have one amazing 1-year-old boy and another one on the way. My partner's pregnant. Hooray, more babies. And I know the emotions of being a father, of having young children, that you suddenly realize that it's quite important that you stay alive. It's quite important that you're there for your kids, that you see them grow up, that they feel loved and nurtured, and they have daddy and mummy there. And Mark Duggan had 6 kids, and he still chose a life of violence, a life by the gun. He chose the way of the gun, the way of the sword. He was living by the sword, having 6 children to depend on him. And one thing is quite likely, is that if you never deal in weapons, if you don't carry a knife or a gun, if there's no intelligence of you wanting a knife or a gun, you're probably not going to be pulled over by an armed response team and then shot. And look, there's so much hysteria, there's so much partisanship in making a video like this that I know a lot of my viewers are going, ah, fuck you, Charlie, fuck the police, you know, how dare they shoot this innocent guy. And yeah, fair enough, look, in the inquest, he wasn't holding a gun at the time. He had the gun in the car and then he threw it over a fence or something, and so he wasn't armed. But those police officers, because, you know, he got pulled over by armed police, why did Mark Duggan come running out of the car? What was he doing, trying to get away? Was he running towards police officers? If it is a big game, if you get pulled over by a bunch of armed British cops, you've lost the game. Just sit still, just put your hands up. But my biggest condemnation here has to be for the choice of Mark Duggan. That you got 6 young children, 6 children that depend on you, and you stay in a life of drugs and violence and guns, and you go to pick up guns from people to the point where you're getting shot dead in the street. The true battle of all of us is an inner battle of the human spirit, of staying positive when everyone around you is going insane, of staying righteous, of keeping that flame in your heart alive. And when you got young children, stay away from the crack cocaine and the guns. That's all I have to say. So it's always unfortunate, but one thing is positive about this, and as a man who films all my street exploits, I support this. There's a big call now for the British police to always be wearing, especially the armed police, to always be wearing cameras, so that we can all see what happens, we can all see the response, and it'll stop a lot of confusion. Anyway, this is Charlie Veach. Thank you again for listening to me. The reason I was filming outside this jewellery store is because it's the greed for shiny objects, diamonds, watches, status. It's the greed for status that drives young men like Mark Duggan to become gangsters.